geeks and geekettes the world over. I was speaking to all of comic book fandom as I welcome you, the discerning YouTube viewer, to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon. Here's where I answer your questions about my career, comic books, writing, and various and sundry other things, including pictures of your dogs. I jokingly asked for pictures of your dogs a while back, and you've sent them. So we're going to call this segment Good Boy. Hey, this is Zoe. Zoe belongs to Sean Thompson, and Zoe looks very, very pleased with herself. She should, because she's a good girl. This is Lucy. Thane Woods assures me that this is her stealth mode. She's apparently a teenage ninja basset sound. And another good girl. What a good girl. Okay, Ryan Johnson, thoughts on Terminalist? I keep thinking of Levon Cade, but without the daughter. Terminalist is a series, I assume they're going to have more of them, on Amazon, and it's been quite the phenomenon for Amazon. And quite the puzzler for people who've been watching Amazon Prime originals. This one kind of comes out of nowhere. It's based on a novel, a best-selling novel, and it stars Chris Pratt, who is a Navy SEAL who uncovers a really terrible government conspiracy, goes all the way up to the State Department and all through the Pentagon and through the hierarchy of the Navy SEALs. And I don't want to spoil anybody for anything, but basically the ruling class in this country do something to him that he does not like, and he does not care for what they did, and he is out to even the score, to make things right, to get his revenge for people that he's lost as a result of the government's actions. I really, really enjoyed this, and it didn't go anywhere I thought it was going to go. You know, you sit and you watch one of these things and you wait for it to go woke. You know, you wait for it to go in a namby-pamby direction. This one did not. They introduced elements early on, a lot of like political intrigue, which usually bores me. And I thought it was just added on. It didn't seem to be going anywhere. But in the end, it was the point of the entire story. Chris Pratt's character is out to get even, not just for people who were willing participants in this government conspiracy and cover-up, but people who were morally compromised enough to look the other way. And that's what really lifts this story. I mean, we've seen these stories before. The guy with all the military skills gets angry and goes after the people that got him angry. This one, it goes beyond that. I mean, there's all of that. There's tons and tons of action in it. Terrific action, believable action, and a lot of suspense. But the conclusion of the story lifts it above the usual genre entries. And you all know I love this genre. By basically calling our leadership to account. I think we've all got this zeitgeist. I don't care where you come from politically, but there's this feeling amongst all of us that we're going in the wrong direction. That perhaps our leaders are not that concerned with our welfare, that aren't really concerned with even representing us in this representative republic that we all swear allegiance to. And this story brings that out, that there are people who are perhaps doing the wrong things for what they believe are the right reasons. They are turning a blind eye to the suffering of others in order to achieve dubious goals. I don't mean to be obtuse on this, but I don't want to spoil the story for anybody who hasn't seen it. But it's everything you would want in a military thriller and nothing you wouldn't want. I enjoyed it from beginning to end. It's been attacked left and right. The most ridiculous attack I've seen is that the acting isn't any good. and I couldn't tell the lead characters apart. I was like, you didn't watch it. You didn't watch it. I watched it with my wife, who won't suffer bad acting for a millisecond, and she loved it too. Now, how did something like this get made? Because of all of the streaming services, um, Amazon Prime is by far the most woke. Most of their output is like a plain vanilla, inoffensive content when it isn't shoving some sort of agenda down your throat. And this one runs so counter to the programming that they usually run that I had to ask myself, well, how did this get made? Um, and I think the reason is Chris Pratt, combined with falling subscription numbers for streaming services. There's very few people that can, when they do a project, can bring in new subscribers for a streaming service. Netflix essentially lost Will Smith with the slap. Um, and so they had to cancel upcoming Will Smith projects. If you follow streaming, a Will Smith movie on Netflix was worth like 15 to 20 million new subscribers. That's how serious this is. So having Chris Pratt do something that becomes a hit for Amazon is, akin to a Hollywood blockbuster, making $500 million domestically. And because you're not just bringing in people to see this one thing, you're bringing them in to spend X amount of dollars per month for who knows how long. And I'm certain that they are going to try to keep Chris Pratt around and to make more of these. And the reason it got made isn't just because Chris Pratt brings in a lot of new subscribers. It's because Chris Pratt apparently has some say over the kind of material he does and does not want to do. Now he made I forget if it was last year or the year before, he was in a really, really dumb science fiction flick they made, a science fiction actioner that was like brain dead. And maybe part of the deal was, okay, I'll make this if you make Terminalist. And of course, dumb as it was, it brought in a lot of new subscribers. Uh, this all goes along with a theory, not a theory, but something I've known for years and years and years. When people talk about woke Hollywood and politically driven Hollywood and left-wing Hollywood, my answer is everything goes in cycles, but there's one constant in Hollywood: money. They want money. They need money. And so when they really need money, they don't care about politics, and they'll make a project, or they'll hire a creator or a writer or director or actor that doesn't share their political views, just to make a film that possibly even runs counter to their own political views. And of course, any sort of traditional values, and any sort of story that presents average Americans in a good light, any story that doesn't deal with race issues in a facile way, or political issues in a facile way, or anything else. I mean, all of them run counter to their political beliefs. And so, when they need the money, when they know the bottom line is being hurt by their causes, they will greenlight something like Terminalist. And I'll go as far to say that, before like the last 2 years or so, when everything just went crazy, before that, like 80% of Hollywood output could be considered what a leftist would think of as conservative, because of the values it stresses and storylines and things like that. So, yeah, Hollywood is playing around playing around with being woke. It's going to end, and we can see it ending. We can see, Netflix in particular told their staff, if we're airing something and you don't like it, go away. You can quit your job, but we're not going to change our content, because our viewers, our subscribers, are telling us what they want, and this is what they want. Paramount CEO recently told his staff and basically told the world that he was not going to take Tropic Thunder off of their streaming service or out of their library just because it offended people. Because the point of Tropic Thunder, the the root of the humor in Tropic Thunder was offending people, stepping outside the envelope. And he said, if you don't like things like Tropic Thunder, don't watch them. So we see kind of a turnaround from the ballsier head offices at some of the major entertainment companies, and eventually the rest will follow. Maybe not as overtly as the Paramount CEO and Netflix board did, but we're going to see it. There will be a turnaround because these people aren't going to give up their mansions and their swimming pools and their hot tubs, and their weekends at Jackson Hole, for global warming and Black Lives Matter. It ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. So anyway, I was hoping someone would ask me about Terminalist, obviously. Daniel Jackowitz. Eric July launched the Rippaverse a couple of days ago with his first offering. He is currently over $1.5 million in less than 3 days. Someone suggested that you would be a wonderful addition to write comics for this new endeavor. I heartily agree and posted a comment that I would ask you about this. So my question is, would you consider writing for the Rippaverse? What are your feelings about Eric's launch? Thanks so much. Eric July is he's done a service to all of comics here. He's gotten rid of all the gatekeepers. At this point, this is like 6 days before this video launches. I make these ahead of time. I'm not trying to be topical here, but at this point, he's at over $3 million. He's still got a long way to go. I think he's got like a month and a half now in this, pitch, this campaign. And I've talked to people who know a lot about crowdfunding, and they think he's going to reach $10 million before all of this is over. Now, $10 million isn't enough to run Marvel or DC, but it's enough to run a really good independent. I mean, he's more capitalized, trust me, than any independent comic book company out there. And I would say at this point, he's more capitalized than DC and Marvel. Because DC and Marvel have to be deeply in debt right now, the way they're trimming staff and, other expenses. So what Eric has done here is he's also freed himself and potentially freed everybody else, inspired everybody else to be freed from the crowdfunding system. Because Indiegogo and Kickstarter infamously will censor, ban, or end campaigns that they don't agree with based on their, I'm using air quotes here, community standards, which they never tell you about. They never enumerate. Eric has built his own crowdfunding machine. God bless this guy. He's built his own crowd. So he's answerable to no one. He is uncancelable. And trust me, they've been trying to cancel this guy forever. I don't have to tell you why. He doesn't think right, in their opinion. he has no right to his own thoughts. He's the enemies of free speech. Eric July is the scariest thing in the world to them. So he's built his own crowdfunding machine, which means he doesn't have to give any money to anybody. All the money he collects goes into content for his company. And that's what he's about, content for his company. That's, another way he's like me. If I raise money, it goes into content. I'm not buying myself a Ferrari. I just want to make more comics. Eric wants to make comics. He's wanted to make comics for a long time, and he's worked hard at this for a couple of years. I mean, he put quite a lot of sweat equity and his own money into beginning the Rippaverse, and a considerable amount of money. And if you watch some of his videos, you see how prepared he is for this. This guy was focused on success to a point where he prepared for success. I mean, he has a warehouse, and I don't mean in his garage. I mean, it's a warehouse. And he's ready for fulfillment. He did his homework. He did what a lot of beginning crowdfunders don't do. He found out what not to do and what to do, how to do it, and understood how much work was going to be involved here. I mean, this is a big, big deal. There's other crowdfunding kings out there. My buddy Graham, my buddy Billy Tucci, Brian Polito, obviously Ethan Van Sciver, but this guy's blowing them all away because he had a following on his videos and everything else, and he's been preparing for this for a long time, and so far he's done everything right. And the comics, what I've seen of them, look good. They look promising. And whatever these comics will be, they'll be what he wanted to make them. There's no gatekeeper here. He's hiring professional talent, top people, and I think he's going to succeed in a big way. Now, the funniest thing is I had no idea any of this was coming. I mean, I didn't know, that he was launching this. And I had contacted him a few weeks ago about appearing on his show to promote Hunter Ninja Bear. I had been on the show once before and really enjoyed it. I like talking to the guy. I like the way he thinks. I like the courage that he has to say what's on his mind without fear. And so it was arranged that I would be on his show, and it was scheduled and everything else. Well, I didn't know it was going to be the day after he hit $1 million. And so we had this show, which still has not been broadcast because, let's face it, the guy's real busy. So he hasn't had time to put it up. That's fine. That's fine. But, so we talked about a lot of different things. And, of course, I was curious as hell about his crowdfunding thing. So we talked a little bit about that and a little bit about the Rippaverse. And at the end of the show, he said, I don't know how to ask you this or whatever, but, if this thing gets up and running and is an ongoing thing, would you be interested in writing for it? And my answer was the answer I always give is, well, I have to see the material and decide not if it's good enough or I like it or anything else, but can I contribute? Is it something I'd be, want to contribute to? Well, I already know I want to contribute to it. So, but I want to make sure I can contribute to it creatively in a meaningful way. But yes, I'm certainly interested in working with Eric because I think what he's doing is terrific. Whether he does it with my help or not, I want him to succeed in a big way because it means he's gonna float all the boats, if you know what I mean. He's already creating a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm. And maybe we can finally leave this Comicsgate pejorative behind. And people will see now that this is a real movement. And it's not about politics. It was about politics when we all got blacklisted and shadow banned, but it's not about politics in the output. The comics themselves are not politically driven. This is just freedom of speech, freedom of creativity. This is just, creators getting together and doing their best work without somebody, standing on their neck. And hopefully we can work something out and I'll do some writing for the Rippaverse. It sounds like a lot of fun. I want to be part of it. But like I said, I want it to succeed even if I'm not a part of it because it's important for the medium that things like this happen. This is a big event, my friends. It really is. And I think he will get to the 10 million. David Jordan, are there any public domain characters you'd like to plan to write? I could see you writing a great Zorro, Tarzan, or Nick Carter, Green Llama, Secret Agent X would be cool too with your writing. Of that list, Tarzan would be the one that would interest me most, but I think there's limitations to that. It's only the first few books. There's a lot of characters that I would want to use. I've always been more interested in later Tarzan, when he takes on the role of Lord Greystoke and all that stuff, and he's established as an adult man, married to Jane, and with Kazar and all that stuff. But I don't think that stuff is public domain yet. But yeah, I'd like to write some. But of all the Golden Age public domain comic characters to write, I've already written Airboy. He's my favorite of all of them. No, I can't say my favorite because I love Plastic Man, but I would never attempt to write Plastic Man. I think some great people have worked on Plastic Man stories post Jack Cole, but none of them were Jack Cole, and I can't be Jack Cole, and I wouldn't try. But Airboy was a comic character I've long been associated with. I think it's safe to say I've written more Airboy than anybody, even the Golden Age guys, because Charles Biro, he hired an army of guys to write these books. So there was never like one consistent writer on Airboy for any long period of time. But I've written a lot of Airboy, and every once in a while go back and do some more. So it's that would be of all the public domain characters, that's the one I would write again, because I kind of got my own brand name on it now. I'm long associated with Airboy, and I kind of feel like I owe Airboy something, because Airboy is what first brought me to the attention of Denny O'Neil and Archie Goodwin. My first professional comic work that they saw and liked, and actually hired me based on my work in Airboy. So there you go. Toggle Lock. Your parents. Why would they name you Toggle? I just woke up from a dream where you randomly appeared at my doorstep and barged inside. You quickly ran over to my pantry and began pulling out ingredients. When I asked you what you were doing in my house, you insisted that I had to try your one-of-a-kind macaroni and cheese recipe. Then when you saw that I was out of paprika, you sent me to the grocery store to grab some while you started cooking. Apparently, that was the key part of the recipe. However, I woke up just as I got back home with the paprika, so now I'm dying to know, what is your one-of-a-kind mac and cheese recipe? While we're at it, are you talented at cooking any other meals? Well, I think that if I were your doctor, I would say lay off the pepperoni pizzas just before bedtime. But as far as mac and cheese, no, I don't have a recipe. My mom used to make it. I don't eat a lot of it now, because it's all carbs and cholesterol. Not that I don't like it, but it's just not a good idea. At my age, to be scarfing down a lot of carbs and cholesterol. But am I good at cooking anything? I think I make a great chili. And anybody who thinks they make a great chili is right, because they think it. I don't know if anybody else likes my chili. My kids seem to like it. My wife, who is a tremendous cook. My wife is a fantastic cook and baker. She's the daughter of a baker. Her dad owned a donut shop. I don't know why she didn't marry a cop. That's a stupid joke. But yeah, she's fantastic. So I don't really compete. The only time I get into the kitchen is if I get to make chili. And I made us get an enormous pot for making chili. One of those, huge guys. And I make enough chili for the week, and then freeze some, because I like it. And how do I like my chili? With lots of beans, lots of different beans. I put beans in that chili you never heard of. So there you go. There's my cooking expertise. One more little secret. That's for you, Bo. Bo's always looking into my life, trying to figure out what he doesn't know about me yet. And there you go. I'll make you some chili sometime, Bo. Thane Woods, who has that terrific dog, the lovely Basset Hound, who was hiding under the draperies. Maybe you answered this, but until recently, I never heard you say much about the original Valiant comics. I know they helped cause the crash, but did you enjoy any of them? I think I went over a little bit of the Valiant comics. My favorite Valiant comic by far was the Robot Fighter, as written by Jim Shooter. I like the different approach to the art, the different approach to storytelling. These comics didn't look like other comics on the stand, and I really appreciated that Shooter sort of returned to a grid format of storytelling, not quite as dictatorial as the old Gold Key comics, but akin. It was grid storytelling, which to me, individual panels, the opposite of image storytelling, and an emphasis on storytelling over the art, although the art was gorgeous on these. And that to me is the purest form of comics, individual static images to tell a story. So yeah, I dug them. I read a few of the others. I don't remember much about them, but the approach to Magnus was terrific. It was a hell of a science fiction epic, and I did dig it. And yeah, I mean, they caused the crash. I think if shooters stayed around the whole time, they wouldn't have helped cause the crash. They would have, but they just started cranking stuff out, and it was all of a consistent quality, but the problem was the quantity was too much, and they flooded the zone along with Image and some other publishers, and just sort of brought comics down under their own weight. Ed Robinson. I remember when I was a teenager living in a religious community reading faith-based Christian Archie and Dennis the Menace comics. I am curious about their history. Were they commissioned, actually driven by the faith of the creators, or just trying to reach an untapped market of comic fans? I've always been curious about that, even as I was reading the heck out of them as a kid, along with my many more secular comics. I remember the Archie Christian comics. I remember particularly Archie Comics did an adaptation of The Cross and the Switchblade, which was a novel and I believe a movie. And they did a comics adaptation. I don't think at Archie it was faith driven. I think it was market driven. I can't say. I don't know. But Archie comics were beginning to fall in sales in the 70s, which is when you would have been seeing these. And I think they thought, well, we've got comics that are undeniably wholesome and clean. Archie, John Goldwater, the guy who started Archie Comics, or MLJ Comics, I think. Is it MLJ? I might have my acronym wrong. Who started the comic book company. He was one of the advocates of the Comics Code. And so Archie probably saw itself in the 70s as, well, we're one of the clean comic books, so our company has a history where we would look like an earnest player in the faith-based comic book marketplace, or which they were creating. The only other faith-based comic I can think of out was Treasure Chest, which is a Catholic publication, which was I believe a monthly comic book done for Catholic school kids. Now, Dennis the Menace, I never saw any Christian-based Dennis the Menace comics, but it doesn't surprise me because Hank Ketchum was a devout Christian, and I can't remember what Protestant denomination he belonged to, but he was very adamant about it. And so I never saw any. Now I'm going to have to see some. I'm curious, but or at least I don't remember seeing any. But in that case, I think it was driven by Hank Ketchum, and everything about Dennis the Menace, including the comics, were driven by Hank Ketchum. I mean, he oversaw everything, and apparently was very, very hands-on as far as content in the comic books, and kind of produced by him through, like a studio effort. So, but that's all I know about it. And a lot of what I just told you is me guessing. But isn't that fun? W.T. Keaton. Chuck, cartoonist Kayfabe recently reviewed Strike number 6, which had a backup story by you and Dan Clowes. How did that unlikely collaboration come about? Yeah, it was an issue of Strike, which was a superhero comic that Eclipse that Tom Lyle and I created. And because Tom was a busy guy, we decided that the lead feature in Strike wouldn't take up the full length of the book, and that we would have, I believe, 5-page backup stories. And I came up with the idea. Well, first of all, I mean, when I proposed Strike to Eclipse, because they were trying to do a lot of different superhero stuff, and it really wasn't catching on. And I was talking to Dean Mulaney, and I said the problem with creating new superheroes out of whole cloth is they have no golden age legacy. And readers really seem to like that, or at least the readers at the time did. I said, what if we created a character who had a golden age legacy that we made up? And what if we put a lot of effort into, faking a golden age legacy for Strike? And so I created the character Sergeant Strike, who in order to explain the rarity of his comic books and why most fans had never heard of them, was that Sergeant Strike never appeared in what we would think of as a traditional comic book. He appeared in a comic book that was printed on the back of cereal boxes from a company called I think it was Happy Cereal or Happy Flakes or something like that. So I made up this whole history of this company, including, you know, the CEOs and the different artists they used and writers. I mean, everything was made up. It was all made up, and I made up quotes from other Golden Age comic book creators reminiscing about Happy Comics, and that you know, they had a short run, but they created a lot of these, you know, really vivid Golden Age characters. And then we would, in the backups and strike, represent these 5-page stories that would appear. They were like a I forgot if they were inside the box or somehow attached outside the box. But if you look at the comics, I wrote whole essays about this for Strike, continuing essays about the history of Happy Comics. And so we had Sergeant Strike, we had the Rattler, we had Kid Lightning. We never got to the White Lion. I wanted to do this like white supremacist Tarzan ripoff, and mocking white supremacy. I'll have you know. So one of the characters that came up with was the Rattler, and the Rattler was a shadow type character, and his hook is that he was legally insane, and he was locked up in a cell in an insane asylum. He was the man from Cell 13, the Rattler. And a well-meaning psychiatrist interested in social reform would occasionally let the Rattler out of his cell to go fight crime, and then he'd have to capture him again. And I thought this was such a gonzo crazy idea that it might appeal to Daniel Clowes' sense of humor. I'd been reading Lloyd Llewellyn at the time and really enjoying it. I look forward to every issue that came out, and in fact. In an early collection of Lloyd Llewellyn, they actually use a quote by me on the back of the book. And it's so early that my name is Charles Dixon in the quote, Charles instead of Chuck. So I talked to Dean. I said, could I hire Dan Clowes to do this? And he goes, yeah, if he's within our page rates and he's interested. And so I got his contact info and I called him and he said, that sounds interesting. And I said, well, let me send you the script. And he liked it. He thought it was funny. And he did it. He did a great job, did an absolutely fantastic job. And it's weird because at the time I had no idea. He was working exclusively for Fantagraphics. He was also working at Crack Magazine. I can't say he was working exclusively. He was doing a series of strips at Crack Magazine with Mort Todd. But he was working mostly, the work that was getting the most notoriety for him was from Fantagraphics. And I didn't know at the time that Gary Groth and Dee Mulaney at Eclipse were in a bitter feud that went back years. I mean, they couldn't stand the sight of each other. And I always wondered if did that get Dan in trouble or if Gary Groth even ever saw the story. Because even though it's not signed Dan Clowes, Dan signed it like Andrew Fishleg or something like that, made up name. Even though he didn't sign it, it's obviously Dan Clowes. I mean, there's not a panel in this story that would fool you that it's anybody other than Dan. And so yeah, it is an unlikely collaboration, but I was so pleased when he said yes, and I was obviously pleased at the work he turned in. Just terrific stuff. A side note on our phony Golden Age characters was that I was very proud that I'd gone into my attempt to spoof everybody to create this fraudulent Golden Age comic book company. Was done so deadpan and so earnestly that I did fool Don Thompson for just a few minutes. He stopped me at a con and said, this Happy Con, he said, that didn't really exist, did it? So he was kind of buying it there for a minute. So if you can fool Don Thompson, one of the great comic book historians and former publisher of the Comics Buyer's Guide, then you've earned a cookie. Don't call me Wave. I won't. The state of mainstream comics, Marvel and DC right now is frankly abysmal. Do you think there's any possibility it can recover back to what it once was? Or is that a lost cause? Do you think it's possible the woke JC politics will ever leave those comics? I think those comics will leave before the woke politics leave, because the people running the companies now have absolutely no interest in the comic audience, no interest in the medium, no interest in the characters that they're supposedly the stewards of. and no interest in apparently any future for Marvel Comics or DC. I guess they're hoping that eventually they'll get hired to work on the movies or TV shows. That ain't never going to happen, kids. But as we look at particularly Marvel right now, they seem to be doubling down on this and using characters created during the woke era, characters that couldn't sell a book, that had to keep being relaunched over and over and over again, hoping to capture an audience and never did. And they're actually spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make movies about these characters that have no proven track record of popularity. So will it end? Yes, it will end. It will end overnight. It will end in a crash. It will end in much crying and gnashing of teeth and people losing jobs because it's got to. It's got to hit the wall. It can't keep going on like this. You can't have your sales collapsing over time. We see how DC is so heavily reliant on only Batman sales to keep the company afloat. That's not good. That is not good because they're just diluting the character. They're just spreading the misery out. And I think the only hope for them is that their parent companies, Disney and Warner's, decide to shut them down. And I hate to say that because I don't want to see the end of DC Comics and Marvel, but somebody's got to pull the plug. These companies are in a coma and they're on life support, and they're not going to last much longer. And it would be a mercy to shut them both down, a mercy to us, the fans, and a mercy to the characters, our beloved characters. Shut those companies down and just license them out to people that would actually give a crap, actually produce quality comics. Maybe Eric July could just buy the Batman license, and maybe that's the future. I hope so, because it's the only future I see that fits. I don't see them all of a sudden waking up and going, hey, we got to get rid of these, hippies and losers and posers and hipsters. We got to throw them out in the street and hire back people who know what the hell they're doing. I don't see that happening, mainly because I don't see it happening anywhere. A lot of these companies are hurting themselves, Disney in particular, but other companies are hurting themselves with their woke attitudes. I mean, losing real money. Target lost a lot of money going woke. Other companies have too, but they don't seem to have gotten it. They don't seem to, have changed course. We need a national apology from these people for what they've done to us. And, because a lot of it's been kind of vicious. I've never in my life seen, outside of maybe a grouchy convention goer, convention guest, see comic book creators turn on their fans the way that we've seen in recent years. And it's like every week we see a new one turning on his fans because they didn't like the direction he took a character, or they didn't appreciate his brilliance to a degree that the creator found satisfactory. So yeah, I don't see it changing, but when it does change, it's going to be like a lightning strike. Sequential treasures. I got a couple of questions for you, Chuck Dixon. In your experience, do you think that the comic book writers and artists who self-insert themselves into the characters which they didn't own or create and stories are merely lacking in creativity, or are they simply narcissists with an agenda beyond just entertaining the audience, or is it a bit of both? Do you think that such attitudes have ruined comic book storytelling in our current times? Well, nothing can ruin comic storytelling. There's still a lot of great alternatives out there. Probably more great alternatives now than there was 10, 20 years ago, because you have so many individual creators just doing it for themselves. But yeah, they haven't helped when you want to insert yourself into your work all the time. I was driving around the car the other day, and by some grand accident, NPR was on the car when I got in, and I was busy backing out of the driveway, so I couldn't be changing the channel. And I heard a teaser for an upcoming episode of one of their programs, and the breathless announcer said that that their next guest was going to be a black gay playwright who had written a musical, a black gay playwright who was formerly an usher for The Lion King, had written a musical about a black gay usher who was an usher at a hit Broadway musical. So this guy was literally writing a Broadway musical about showing people to their seats in a Broadway musical. Uh, yeah, that's about as well. I can't even use the language I want to use. that's that's self abuse, is what that is. Do you think that your life is so interesting that everybody else would love it too? And I see a lot of comic book creators basically foist their life onto these, godlike creatures, thinking that, well, my take or my life experience will enrich these characters. Oh, yeah. Is it narcissistic? Yes. Is it a lack of creativity? Yes, because these people can't imagine experiences beyond their own life. It's probably because they're all atheists. They can't imagine anything that happened before they were born, or anything that happened outside of their line of vision or outside of their neighborhood. I mean, they don't even know what the Korean deli 6 blocks away from them looks like. Can't imagine they only know their own Korean deli. So, yeah, when you look upon an industry that was built by guys like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, Denny O'Neil and Charles Bureau, I mentioned earlier, people like that, that came up with these wild, insane concepts, from some, weird part of their brain, and never wrote about themselves. Nothing. Their work never had anything to do with their own lives. It was escapism. By creating this stuff, they were escaping their own life and inspiring millions of others to escape theirs by enjoying the work that they were doing. So, but to just basically take a superhero story and make it about you in drag, yeah, that's your answer was in your question. Is basically what I'm saying. Matt Carnes, nothing wrong with killing in comic books, but be consistent. If you kill the NPCs, kill the main boss too, or at least have them revenge murdered. I hate when someone murders a legion of NPCs and then gets a heart and spares the main boss. Well, I'll tell you, the worst example of that I've ever seen was the very first issue of Vigilante, DC's take on the Punisher. They were trying to get some of that Punisher vibe going for them, and they came up with this guy who looked like an Olympic skier, and he goes around killing people. In the first issue of Vigilante, he goes onto the estate, the walled estate of a mafia boss, and he kills guys. He shoots them down. I haven't read the comic in years, but he kills these guys in a variety of ways. Finally makes it into where the mafia boss is. The mafia boss, even though there's been automatic gunfire and grenade explosions and screaming people as they die, the mafia boss is still in his handball court, still playing handball. He's apparently so dedicated to handball. He didn't look like a guy dedicated to handball, but he was so into handball that nothing was going to interrupt his game, even the annihilation of his army of henchmen. And the vigilante shows up. He's got this guy dead to rights. He can just put a bullet in his head and go home and order a pizza, but he doesn't. He challenges the mafia don to a handball fight, to a handball game, and they play handball. And the vigilante, humiliates the guy by winning the game, and that's enough. That's enough revenge. I made a fool of you at your own game, and walks away. That's not how this genre works. No. It reminds me of the final season of Equalizer. I liked the show The Equalizer until the final season, when the network said, "Yeah, you gotta lay. This guy's a little too rough on bad guys. You gotta lay off." And I arrived in an episode where the Equalizer is going after a child molester, catches up with the guy, and just gives him a good talking to, and then lets him go. In previous episodes, he would have thrown him off a fire escape, but in this episode, he just talks to him real mean and just warns him not to do it again. And I thought, well, I'm never watching this show again, and I never did. So there's two very good examples, two absolutely letter-perfect examples of what you were talking about. And no, I don't like it. Dara O'Sullivan, you have been known to sip some tea during your videos. I have a tea right now, a Lipton decaffeinated with some honey. Do you drink your tea hot? I just answered your question. Or given the temperatures in Florida this time of year, cold as an iced tea? Do you have a favorite blend? Or do you opt for the good old traditional English tea with cream and 2 sugars, a milk tea? I used to drink tea with cream and 2 sugars when I was a kid. My grandmother would make it. I generally don't take it with cream. I know you're all fascinated at this point. Aren't you glad I saved this question until near the end? Uh, so I eschew the cream, put a little honey in there, and it's usually just regular old Lipton decaf off the shelf. Occasionally I'll have an herbal tea, either iced or hot. But yeah, here in Florida we drink a lot of iced tea, a ton of iced tea with lemon. So I don't. Do you drink iced tea over there? You're in Ireland. I know. I know. You make fun of American tourists when they come because we always want so much ice. I mean, you even drink your beer warm. I don't like beer cold. I can't imagine it warm. Okay, and of course my cup of choice, in case you were wondering. Okay, what you reading? A couple of entries for what you're reading this week. I'm reading this book called Rogues by Patrick Radden Keefe. It's 13 essays that Mr. Keefe wrote for the New Yorker magazine, and he spent a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, sometimes more, researching each one of these long form articles about criminals. And what I like about this, I like true crime stories, but reading about the guy that pushed his wife down the stairs and threatened his children, and the trial went on forever. It's tedious. I like some variety in my true crime stories, and Mr. Keefe provides that. The very first chapter is about a wine counterfeiter. It's a fascinating story about the wine industry, vintage wines, and the people who defraud morons who think they can tell the difference between one wine and another just because they have a lot of money. In the second chapter, he talks about the kidnapping of Freddie Heineken, the head of the Heineken beer company in Holland. It was the most scandalous crime in Dutch history, and the ramifications of it, and how the criminal was ultimately caught and jailed because he was betrayed by members of his own family. And it's a fascinating story. And I'm still reading the book, so I'm in the middle of a guy whose brother died in the Lockerbie, Scotland bombing of Pan Am 103. And his brother is not convinced that the people they claim did it, the Libyan bomber, I forget the guy's name, who was released from Scottish jail, was convicted and then released to return home to Libya. He's not convinced that he either did it, or that he acted alone, or that he was even in charge of it. And he's dedicated his life to finding out who killed his brother. And he's just a regular Joe citizen, but he left whatever business he was in to join a detective agency in order to learn how to become a detective, and learn. He raised funds and everything else to have this continuing and often harrowing and dangerous investigation that he goes on, disguised as a journalist, to try to uncover who killed his family. But these are really well written. They're brisk reads. Mr. Keefe goes into a lot of detail, but he doesn't weigh you down with anything that's unnecessary. Plus, in every instance, he's talked to players in the story, so he's interviewed people in these things that tell him their side of it. And so far, it's terrific. Maybe I'll come back and talk about it more when I've finished it. I just finished reading the second volume of Rip Kirby from the American Library of American Comics, as edited and designed by my buddy Dean Mullaney. Rip Kirby was a comic strip by Alex Raymond. After Raymond got out of the Marines following World War II, he didn't want to go back to Flash Gordon or Jungle Jim or Secret Agent X9 or any of the other strips he was doing. Wow, Secret Agent X9 gets a shout out twice in this video. He created a brand new character called Rip Kirby, and Rip Kirby was the first really adult mystery strip, crime strip for the newspapers. Up until then, Dick Tracy was the #1 crime strip, but but Dick Tracy was drawn in that very exaggerated style with cartoony characters. Nothing against Dick Tracy, excellent strip, but it was never meant to reflect the real world. It was always supposed to be allegorical or whatever. You know, especially going into the early 50s with a lot of fantastical elements being introduced. And here comes Rip Kirby. He's a private detective in New York City. He's very akin to Ellery Queen, and he's got a private home life. He's got a fiance. There's a lot of soap opera elements in the story, but there's also some very neat, very tightly plotted mystery and adventure stories. And of course, they're drawn by Alex Raymond. So they have this almost magazine illustration quality to them. I mean, it is a gorgeous strip, as you can see, just beautifully rendered and different than anything Raymond had done before, because it's more set in the real world, obviously, than Flash Gordon or any of his other work. And it's the storytelling is perfect. I mean, nothing I can't take away from his other strips. Flash Gordon was not a storytelling groundbreaker. It was more like an illustrated story, much like Prince Valiant was. But his work evolved over the years until he created this strip, and it is the first modern detective comic strip. In that the people look like real people. It's set in the real world. There's no fantastic elements to it, and it's just a straight up whodunit crime stories that managed to crank up quite a bit of suspense. As I was reading this book, I couldn't put it down till I was done each story segment. The story segments might run as long as 3 months. This book contains 3 years of strips, daily strips. I don't think there ever was a Sunday Rip Kirby. And they're good. I mean, you want to finish them. You want to know what happens next. You want to know who done it. You want to make sure that Rip's fiance doesn't get thrown off the cliff or whatever. Good stuff and mature stuff. The writing's not gimmicky or too clever by half. It seems very real, and the characters are very compelling. And I'm curious about the writing process, though, because Raymond didn't write his own stuff up until this point. And these are very, very well written, and every indication tells me that Raymond wrote these himself. So he was a double threat comic book creator or comic strip creator. You learn something new every day. I get a frequent question. So many of you asked that I don't want to pull out one question, so I'll just answer all of you at once. People ask me, what was your favorite toy growing up? It was Mark's play sets when I was growing up. A lot of them were themed to television shows, or they were Civil War, or they were World War II. And my favorite of all of them was The Rifleman. It was my favorite TV show as a kid. It's still my favorite TV show today. And a play set, it was little toy soldiers. It wasn't like action figures. But for $4.95, you could get this box, and it had Lucas McCain's ranch in it. It had the fence and the cows and the cowhands and the bad guys and the bank robbers and the sheriff. And it even had the cabin and another stable building, which were made out of metal. They were litho on metal, and you had to get your dad to fold them together. Otherwise, you as a kid, you'd bend them the wrong way, and they'd never look right. And horses, anvils. I mean, everything you need to run a ranch was right here in this box. If you were 1.5 inches tall. So there you go. Hey, you want to contact me, you reach me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is by far the most reliable way to get a hold of me. And that's the one you should use. And while I got you, I know a new Levon book came out a little while ago, but there's another one. My publisher decided to take the 2 books that I had handed in close to each other and release them close to each other. I don't know if this is a strategic ploy to see what happens if 2 of my books came out close together, but the new one is Levon's Range. If you read Levon's Prey, you're going to be wondering what the hell happened next. Where is Levon and Mary and the rest of the Cade clan going? Well, they're going to Idaho because they're in hiding. They don't want the government to find them, and they are off on Levon's Range. But as always, no matter where Levon goes, trouble follows. And I think there's some real surprises for you here, and it's a little bit topical as my Levon stories move closer and closer to being contemporary stories. I generally set them a few years in the past when I started, but now they're starting to catch up with the world as we know it right now. And of course, all of the Levon Cade novels are available on Kindle, in paper, and in audiobook from our corporate overlords at Amazon. That's it for me this week. I really appreciate you watching and listening, subscribing, and super thanking, and commenting and questions. Send those questions in. I am out of questions. These are the last questions I had in the bag. So send some more in. And I appreciate it from everybody, and I will see you all down the road.